Hello everyone, my name is Patiphak Klandee, and in this video I will be talking about the energy mix problem. And what the energy mix problem is the problem of supplying high electrical and power demands, but the cost of supplying these electrical and power needs is becoming increasingly more difficult to manage. And thus, power plants and generators are pushed even more, which can damage them and even break them, which is very not it's not feasible for the business. And so a optimization is needed to efficiently and feasibly provide energy and power to the population whilst keeping the costs at a minimum. And what the optimization solution is that this optimizing energy mix, and that its main objective is to find the least cost way to produce the required outputs and meet the hourly demands. Now, for this model, it takes on a bit of assumptions, and the special assumptions taken here are the hydro generators, which is the reason for that is because the hydro generators usually are not performing at their full capacity, and up and therefore is placed a constraint, and more will be talked about that later on. But these are the assumptions taken when creating the model. For the constraints, as mentioned earlier, the hydro generators have a constraint put on them because they're often affected by the seasonal changes, as well as the differing regulations that many hydro stations have. Um, and that's why they have the constraints put on them. Another constraint is the constraint on the different types and pricing of coal, as the different types have different properties, and thus they give different power output, and that's why the constraint is placed on the coal types. Now, when producing the result, the model takes into consideration of the following consideration, and these are all pretty standard for calculating the output of generators and the types of generators being included into the model. Now moving on to the actual model itself, the main formulation is shown here. The top ones uh, applies to carbon emission generators. As you can see, the Cg plus CeCO2 Eg, which is pretty much the sum of the CO2 emission and the cost of that, and the cost of gas. We have the hydro formulation down here as well, and that's the restriction placed on, or the constraint placed on hydro generators when calculating the hydro output. Next we have the parameters. Now the parameters are what it can be changed and modified to provide the different variables and results. and they're all pretty explanatory. The nameplate's capacity is just the set capacity for certain types of generators. Reserve net margin is the peak and the maximum capacity that generators can run on. Now we have the variables which the model produces, and these variables uh, are represented in a graphical format. Uh, a schedule just shows the generators and what time they're running on throughout the day. Resource utilization takes in the nameplate capacity for the different types of generators and the average production or generation in a day. So now those variables can be taken into further considerations in assessment, and improvements on the operation and the production and generations can be made from those variables. Uh, but just to be clear, this formulation is only made for this particular issue, as most of the parameters and the values are associated to power plant and power generation, and thus cannot be used in other fields. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.